Okay, cool. All right. So I'm going to talk about something a little bit different. So everybody here has been talking about online spaces and how to do collaboration through that. I'm going to talk about what we've done in terms of physical spaces. So let's kind of go into that. First, I'll give a little intro. Now, I work in this conservation technology space, but my background is engineering. I worked for 11 years as a spacecraft engineer. So one of my spacecrafts is in that picture behind me. But I came back to school and started kind of realizing how much opportunity there was in upgrading the tools that conservationists and scientists used. And so in 2013, I became one of Nat Geo's explorers, and since 2016, I've been one of their fellows, working on this area of conservation technology. How do we bridge the gap between modern technological innovation and conservation, wildlife conservation? So in 2014, 2015, I walked away and did that full time as opposed to just kind of this part-time thing that I was doing before then, and started Conservify, which is a nonprofit conservation technology development lab. So I believe, I've been told this, I haven't verified it, but I think it's the first conservation technology, solely conservation technology focused hardware lab that anyone ever set up. It's here in downtown Los Angeles, so that's where I'm based. Here's a picture of the previous lab space that we had before, and I'll kind of tell a little bit of the story behind that. But what we do at Conservify, first of all, is we only work on conservation projects. And the main thing is collaboration is absolutely fundamental in everything that we do. So, I here have a team of engineers and designers and software folks that are focusing on building these tools. But for every single project that we take on, it's a collaboration between our organization and another organization or another individual. And that individual brings in the science and conservation expertise. Now, over the years, I've learned a lot about conservation, and I kind of know what's going on in that space. But we won't take on a project that's not affiliated with an expert that is working out in the field and has a strong kind of community relationship in the areas that they're working. A lot of this, the way that we operate came as a result of some volunteer work I was doing before I got into this space, which was with Engineers Without Borders. And I saw the way that Engineers Without Borders ran their projects and communities and what led to the best success in those projects. And I tried to model a lot of the stuff that we do at Conservify around that. So we work with academia on a bunch of projects. So UCLA, UC Santa Barbara, Florida International University, a bunch of different universities on different projects. And then organizations like National Geographic, WCS, Nature Conservancy, and others on specific projects. And the way it usually works here in the lab is, there'll be something that they want to measure or something that they need a tech tool to kind of help with. And we go through a formal design process around what needs to happen, what their core needs, what actually needs to get built. And so that's an interesting activity, because a lot of times you find out that what they came in thinking they needed is not actually what they needed. And then in the lab, the lab facilities we have here allow us to very quickly prototype and iterate and design and get something out so that we can test it. And then we'll go through the process that we need to go through for the full design. So manufacturability, repairability, and all the things that we want to do later on in the space. Everything that we create is open source. So we use a lot of we use GitHub and other open source collaboration tools. Actually, I'll say this one right now. We try and do a good job at documenting a lot of the stuff that we do internally for the team. We're getting better about documenting externally. But we use a lot of online collaboration tools, because my team is distributed, and I'll explain a little bit more about that in a second. So we use Uber Conference and Zoom and Google Suite, make sure that we're archiving notes and doing all the stuff that we heard about in that first presentation, but also things like Slack, and then design specific tools, tech tools, things like GitHub and the Autodesk tools and the Creative Cloud tools, and some that are more geared towards UI and UX and things like that. So a lot of those sorts of things are very key to everything that we're doing here physically in this space. We also open up a lot of our data, and I don't have to talk to this group about that. and STEM outreach is a big part of the things that we do. So a few of the projects that I worked on from 2014 to 2017, I was working on Nat Geo's Okavango Wilderness Project, which is now a big major initiative, National Geographic, designing technologies and a lot of the tools that allow them to bring their data back. I've done a ton of work in drones. You can see one of the drones behind one of the earlier stuff that we were working on. That was actually my first grant from National Geographic, was around drone work, and we're still doing a lot of drone work to this day. And we do a ton of work around sensors. Sensors is something that I'm super excited about. So FieldKit is something that you might have heard of on Twitter or something, and that's basically a lot of the sensor work that we'd been doing in the past. We're trying to pull that together and turn it into a free and open source product line that anybody can end up using. So that's not fully released yet. We're in a development effort right now that's supported by National Geographic and the Moore Foundation to kind of get through this phase, and then towards the end of this year, you'll be seeing a lot about that. But part of that is also how do we build this community around people who are developing sensors and visualizing that data. So that's the other thing. The FieldKit team is actually a distributed team. So, you know, we have software engineers in Portland, Oregon, and hardware engineers in Connecticut, and data visualization folks in New York. So, and then we're here in Los Angeles. So a lot of that daily and weekly collaboration we have to building this product is done virtually. And so I could, if people are interested about that, I could talk about a little bit about our process on doing that. But what I actually wanted to talk about here is physical spaces. So there's kind of different types of physical spaces that you could build these sorts of conservation technology tools in. And I've done all of these that are listed here. I've kind of gone in the order that you see here. So the personal spaces is, you know, building it on your living room table or things like that, which I did for years and years, right? My dining room table became my conservation technology workspace for a very long time. And then there's shared spaces. These are things like, you know, makerspaces or even kind of accelerators sometimes have these facilities. We actually were affiliated with one of them that I'll talk about in a little bit, that we were part of the shared space. And it's kind of like the next level beyond a makerspace in that it's somewhat, they don't allow anyone to come in and use the tools. And oftentimes they have like a little higher caliber tools that they're dealing with there. But there's pros and cons around all of that sort of stuff. The FieldKit's principal engineer is this guy named Jacob Llewellyn, who works here in the lab, and he was actually used to live in Connecticut and was part of Makehaven, which is a massively successful makerspace out there that's public and open to anybody. And so we've taken a lot of the lessons learned he had as being a key part of Makehaven and kind of incorporated here. Conservify is like maybe one of those, it's what I would consider that next level, so it's dedicated space. So we're dedicated towards the projects that we're working on mostly. That being said, this Conservify lab is open to collaborators all the time. So I have other groups coming in and using the gear that we have to design things, or, you know, friends and other folks that are doing conservation technologies projects that need meeting space or whatever it ends up being. If they're ever in the Los Angeles area, I open my doors and they can do whatever they want in here. I really think that part of it is an important part of it, as opposed to just being a closed lab. And the last is distributed spaces. So how do you kind of collaborate amongst different organizations who might have these sorts of shared spaces, or even work with a team that's distributed? And so there's complexities and things you have to deal about once you get up to that sort of level. So this is the first dedicated space that we had for the Conservify lab. As you can see right here, there's not very much stuff in it. We were just kind of moving in and figuring out what we needed. This is how chaotic it got towards the end before we moved out. So we kind of outgrew that space. As you can see, there's various items from various projects, lots of foam from Pelican cases that we use to move things around. And so we had since moved into this bigger space that I will actually give you guys a tour of. And this is us working, our team working in this bigger space as we're doing some development effort. The last bit that I'll say about those the spaces, like the incubator type spaces, is we were residents for in Supply Frame's design lab. So if you're not familiar with Supply Frame, they're the company that puts on the Super Conference, and they own Hackaday and Tindy and all those organizations. So Supply Frame was doing this residency program. I would say in the last 4 years, they've probably done it twice, where they bring in teams that are working on a product to use their space. to kind of develop it. The cool thing about them is they have some like really nice like 5-axis mill and like all this really expensive big shop bot and equipment that we don't have here that allows you to do some interesting things with it. And then they also have like product design experts that work there and kind of help you think through products. We were the only one that's like strictly conservation technology focused when we were working there. There's other projects that are adjacent to it, so things that are using VR and AR, but there's a lot of these really interesting opportunities that are coming up that allow you kind of some time in that sort of space. So it's an interesting thing to kind of think through if you really need help on a certain thing. Like how do you go from a your breadboard or Arduino project to something that's maybe a little bit more polished and works in the field. Okay, tour. So I'll give you guys a quick tour of our lab. I'm going to just do it with my laptop, so hopefully it's not too makes you all seasick and stuff. So this is the kind of the working section of our lab. So we have some desks where people are working at. We have a fish tank where we do a lot of testing of sensors and things like that. And then we actually, the interesting thing is all our projects we use on these little baker trays, and I'll show you the tray in the cart in the background in a second. So we have like a collaboration space where we kind of sit around the table. We could talk about things, and a library where we have a lot of information, some past projects in this thing. But we do a lot of collaboration on whiteboard and paper as we're going through those sorts of things. This is the tray that I told you about. This I love using this because we could just organize by projects on tray, and so we know where everything is when we're going through it. We have a part of our lab right here where we build electronics. So here we do all our placement on circuit boards, and we have a reflow oven where we can actually do a lot of the electronics. Some of this work now is done in Connecticut, as I was telling you guys before. We have our little kitchen area, which is nice because the beer fridge is an important part of the lab. And then here's kind of where a lot of our prototyping equipment is. So we have a glow forge, we have an other mill, a couple of 3D printers and form labs, and a lot of that stuff is right there. Here's where we do a lot of our electronics beyond just the small pick and place type stuff. And then we have like a microscope and some rework station right over there. And lastly, I'll say in the back, it gets a little chaotic back here, but we do a lot of our mechanical work on this side of the room right here, and then and we have storage room right there. So that's kind of a quick tour of the Conservify space and the kinds of things that we can do there. So let's see, I think. Yep, that's it.
That was wonderful. Thanks, Shah. Hey, Lou, do you want, before I call on you, Lou, I just wanted to ask Shah, you mentioned Engineers Without Borders and Makehaven as two other projects you or your team members have been involved in that you've taken, you've learned from before you set up Conservify. And you said that there were a lot of lessons learned you took from them. What sort of, can you elaborate a bit about what sort of lessons learned you took before thinking about how to set up Conservify?
Yeah, I mean, I think, so with respect to Makehaven and Makerspaces, when we were setting up Conservify, we didn't necessarily want it to be an open makerspace. And that's not because I think open makerspaces are very valuable and they're important. I've seen them be maybe a little less successful in such a spread out places as Southern California and Los Angeles. But we wanted to be very directed in the work that we did here. And we wanted to make sure that the funding that we got to run this place like specified that this is very directly what we're kind of working on. And so that actually allowed us to get specific funding that we probably wouldn't have been able to get if we were just this open kind of makerspace with a more open mission, by directing that mission and keeping it a little bit more close. What I was saying with the Engineers Without Borders lessons learned that we had there was Engineers Without Borders is a really great organization. They grew very quickly. And I think one of the core things that they do when they take on a project is they make sure that there's this longer running commitment to that project. And one of the most important parts of that is that the projects that they're working on and the deployments that they're doing out in the field aren't just, you know, somebody from the US flying over and dumping a bunch of water pumps in an area that doesn't have clean water, right? It's a commitment you have to that community. You're working with that community, understanding there's a sustainability that's built into projects through understanding how the maintenance is going to take place, and if there's ways to keep funds coming so that that maintenance doesn't fall short. So that it's this bigger life cycle vision of what a project takes on, as opposed to people who want to just, you know, buy a drone and fly out to Kruger and try and find poachers or something like that, right? So every project we take in, we're thinking through what's that full life cycle, and how does stuff that we're doing here at the lab make things easier for the people out in the field? How does it build in those philosophies around maintenance and repair and longevity that we think is really important? How do we make sure that the stuff we're building here fails gracefully and it doesn't fail in a catastrophic way that impacts the aims of that group? So there's a lot that we think about as we're going through and building the project, and we do all the testing and stuff here on site, and also like locally, you know, in our backyards and things like that. So that's one thing that we're actually doing this year that we hadn't done previously, is have local projects. So projects that we can drive to, as opposed to flying for 20 hours on airplanes to get to. And that's, I mean, I think that's a big thing, is to be able to do that and interact with it a little bit more like that. Yeah, that's something else.
The second question I had was, you asked about, in the chat, you're asking about community building resources. Are you guys building a community around FieldKit?
Yeah, we are. So that's great. So we are looking to build a community around FieldKit. But the idea around FieldKit is, we just want to make a lot of the same things that people are doing, or mistakes that people are making. We want to get rid of those. And so one of the major things that we're looking to do with FieldKit is we don't want it to be the how, like where everybody lives, but we want it to be a tool that people can use and very easily bring within other tools that they actually use. So modular and easy to kind of integrate with social media or other communities or other sort of systems. And so we've been thinking a lot about that and talking to folks at places like Public Labs to understand the work that they're doing and how the work that we're doing can complement it more greatly. But part of, I think it's important to have a community if you're doing technology development, because we can't do everything here. We know there's a big demand for different sorts of tools and products out there, and we want to do whatever we can to make it easier for people to create their own versions of stuff.
Lou, did you want to jump in and ask your question about distributed versus dedicated spaces?
Yeah, sure. So I really appreciated the list of the four sort of types of spaces, so personal to shared to dedicated to distributed. And I wonder whether it's intended to be kind of a chronology. So does everybody start off at personal and then end up in some kind of shared group, and then realizing that actually having a dedicated space is the way to go? And is that what ensures the success of a distributed space, do you think? Or can you jump in at any point?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think so. With the one caveat that I think that the process that I went through, as you go through those 4 bullet points, you make mistakes along each one. Like you buy the wrong things, or you hinder your projects by staying in your personal space for too long, or whatever it is. Like all those mistakes that you end up making along the way, which I haven't actually sat down and tried to write them all down. It would probably be a good thing for me to do and share with the community. Like those mistakes are good lessons as you move up the chain. But you 100% could just jump to a distributed sort of thing and be fine. It just, being able to manage that sort of thing gets a little more complicated.
And I think you're hitting on exactly what we think about as communities mature as well. And maturing online may or may not mean adopting different tools and different platforms, but in your example, perhaps this maturing to being a distributed kind of functional community definitely means a change in kind of physical circumstance, and that is going to mean a change in the way the community is managed. And so kind of being mindful of that as you make the transitions through the phases.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the biggest thing that I've learned from going from dedicated to distributed is once you make that leap, the communication and the online collaboration, the kind of the drumbeat that you set to doing that and keeping that going is incredibly important. Because you don't have someone sitting right in front of you that you can ask them that question. So you have to really build in the systems that allow these things to move forward at a pace that you're actually going to get stuff done, as opposed to, you realize 2 months have gone by and nothing happened.
Yeah. Do you think there's a way it can go from it can function starting off as distributed? Like, because in the chat there's been a lot of, and on Wild Labs and in other spaces, there's been a lot of chat about, like, okay, how do we split up engineering loads and how do we get different spaces to work together? And with your project, it comes from the central core and like diverts out. Do you think there's a way of doing it so that it can be modular and come together a bit more organically?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think there are, and I think there's some people who are doing a great job at that. I mean, we work a lot with other organizations that are in this same place, like Conservation X Labs and other groups that are doing that. And, they'll have things built here and we'll send it over, or, we kind of share some of the load in terms of developing. And I think that's an important thing. I think in practice, making that work seamlessly can be fairly difficult, just because when you have different spaces, if they're not all aligned on what their core goals are, then obviously people get busy and things can fall off. And so I think making sure that you're aligned in the same goal. If you're both aligned in the same goal, if the different distributed spaces are all aligned to that same goal, it actually can be quite a powerful thing, especially if you have access to certain gear in one place and certain expertise in another place, and you're really leveraging the online tools in a productive way.
Do you know of any examples of how that's working well? You mentioned Conservation X Labs.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think of like what would be a really good example that everyone would know about, where that's working well in this space.
Oh, it doesn't have to be in this space. I'm not sure it's existing in this space yet, is it?
Yeah, maybe not so much in this space. That's a good question. I'd have to think about it a little bit more.